I'd like to welcome you to the second of our series of town meetings in anticipation of the annual meeting, which is 2 weeks from tonight. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss the master plan for our golf course as prepared by Gil Hands in collaboration with Bradley Klein. Our grounds chair, Artie Fitzgerald, will introduce Gil and Brad shortly. But before we do that, I wanted to personally thank Artie for obtaining the services of Gil and Bradley. As many of you know, Artie had a previously relationship with Gil, which brought him to Worcester Country Club. Gil and Brad are the best in the business, and we're fortunate to have them, okay? Before I turn it over to Artie and Gil and Brad, I just wanted to spend a minute discussing the process, the Pritchard plan, the history behind it, and soon to be, hopefully, the Hands plan, okay? Why the Pritchard plan, okay? We put the Pritchard plan in about 18 years ago into our bylaws, and essentially the Pritchard plan was meant to protect us from ourselves, to make sure that any improvements, any modifications to our golf course is in accordance with the Pritchard plan, again, hopefully soon to be the Hands plan, so that we can maintain the classic nature of our Donald Ross gem that defines Worcester Country Club. Pritchard developed that plan, Ron Pritchard, and over 18 years, we've chipped away at that plan. We've done a lot of things in that plan. Have we done everything? No. But we've done a lot of it, and we've maintained the classic nature of our golf course, and we'll continue to do that, hopefully over the next 20 years under the Hands plan. So again, the Hands plan is essentially a continuation of Pritchard, okay, with Gil's stamp of approval on it, okay? The plan is a blueprint. Will we do everything in the plan? Probably close to everything, but maybe not, and maybe the priorities of when we'll do what will be dependent upon the Board of Governors, the Grounds Committee, and a yet-to-be-named special committee to prioritize, okay? We'll be asking for your approval for this plan at the annual meeting. Your Board of Governors, your Grounds Committee have unanimously approved this plan, and we hope that you will as well. With that as background, I'd like to turn over the mic to Artie Fitzgerald to give you a little background on Gil and Bradley and get this ball rolling. Artie.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you all for coming. Your attendance here today is indicative of your love for this golf course and your passion for this country club. It's a great place, and we're all proud to be members here. I met Gil and Brad 11 years ago, approximately this time in May, when they came to Whitensville Golf Club on a rainy Friday afternoon. It was one of those rainy days in May. We were all excited to play golf, but we could see our breath. And I remember walking the golf course with Brad and Gil and spending 3 hours on the first 9 holes. I watched as they talked together, and they talked about things that I had no idea what they meant. We went in, we met with the Greens Committee, and as you know, Whitensville's a 9-hole course, and it was getting dark, and they said to me, let's go walk the last 3 holes. So we put our rain gear on, we threw our umbrellas, and out we went, and we spent another hour and a half out on the golf course. I was impressed at the time about how much knowledge they had on golf course architecture. I learned just how little knowledge I had, and I was thankful that we at Whitensville had an opportunity to listen and engage their services to improve the golf course there at the time. Today, Whitensville is number 1 in the country, 9 holes, and number 70 in the country, classic courses, the only 9-hole course of all 18-hole courses in the top 100 in the country. And a lot of that is due to Gil and Brad's work. Today, Gil is the most sought after and highly respected golf course architect in the world. His original designs, Stream Song Black, Mossy Oak, Rustic Canyon, Boston Golf Club, have all been rated in the top 100 in the country. He's been asked to do the 5th course at Bandon Dunes, and hopefully he'll break ground soon because some of us are planning a trip out there and we want to get there when it opens. Additionally, as you know, in 2016, golf returned to the Olympic Games. In preparation for that competition, many of the world's well-known golf architects bid for the right to build the Olympic golf course. Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, Tom Doak, Gary Player, a whole host of iconic names in golf. Well, Gil Hanse won the bid. When it was announced that he won the bid, I remember watching the Cadillac Championship at home on TV, and they interviewed Phil Mickelson. And he said, the Olympic Committee deserves a lot of credit. They could have hired a big name. Instead, they chose the best. And I'll never forget that. Additionally, the PGA of America recently has indicated an intent to move their headquarters to Texas. I'm sure they could hire any golf course architect in the world to build their golf course in Texas. They've hired Gil. To me, I love classic golf courses. We all play a bunch of golf courses, but the ones that stick out in my mind are always the classic ones. So most impressive to me are the memberships of the iconic golf courses in the country that have entrusted their golf courses to Gil Hanse. The Country Club, Winged Foot, Merion, Fisher's Island are just a few of the top 100 classic golf courses whose memberships have seen fit to entrust the courses that they grow up on, that they love, that their parents have been members of, to Gil Hanse. Hopefully, we will do the same in 2 weeks. I also got to meet Brad Klein. Brad is the foremost Donald Ross historian in the world. Why is that important? Because when golf courses are restored, we look at historical photographs. We do research. There's no one better in the world than Brad Klein at doing that. In 2001, the United States Golf Association bestowed the Herbert Warren Wind Award to Brad for his Donald Ross book, Discovering Donald Ross. More importantly and more impressive, the Golf Course Architects Association, or the American Society of Golf Course Architects, awarded Brad the Donald Ross Award in 2015 for his contributions to golf course design and golf course architecture. Today, after 20 years as the architecture editor at Golf Week magazine, Brad has decided and has entered a new journey at Golf Channel. He's also has opened his own consulting business. So with that background in mind, I'm proud, I'm pleased, I'm excited to present Brad and Gil to all of you so that they can tell you about their vision for Worcester Country Club in the next 20 years. Thank you.
pretty short. Sorry. I can't help but disappoint by opening my mouth after an introduction like that, so thank you very much. It was very kind of you. Thank you all for attending tonight. We're going to run through a presentation here and discuss. We're actually going to tag team it a little bit. I'll go for a little while, then Brad will come up, and then I'll come back, and that'll hopefully keep everyone's interest as we go forward with this. I'm going to do a lot of pointing. It's not like the Vanna White thing, but Bill's got to kind of flip it for me, so every time I do this, he'll flip the screen. One of the things we just wanted to show, obviously all of you are well aware of the history of this golf course and this country club, and we take that very seriously. We're very prideful in the fact that we're here, and we're excited about the opportunities working at such a great historic club. We also are very impressed with the new presentation when you come in the doorway with the trophies on display. I think that really, not that you needed any validation, but it's certainly a nice stamp for anybody who visits this club and understands the history and the significant events that happened here. All right, so that's what I like to do. So I tell members that I have to do these meetings to support my bulldozer habit. So that's where you can generally find me. In fact, I was on a bulldozer this morning down at Marion, and it's what we love and the way we practice our craft. We feel very strongly that being in the field, being involved, being part of the implementation of golf course architecture is just as important as preparing the plans and coming up with the thoughts and the ideas. So we've got a group of guys. Kevin Murphy, one of our talented associates, is here with me tonight. It's what we do. We do our own shaping, we build our own designs, we work with the courses that we restore, and we really feel that's an important aspect of it. And to be honest, it's the most fun part of what we get to do. So Artie's already covered this. You can read the list of places that we've worked. This is Los Angeles Country Club, the 8th hole in the North Course, which will be the 2023 U.S. Open site, first time in history at Los Angeles Country Club. We've got a nice little run of U.S. Opens at the Country Club in 22, Wingfoot in 20, Country Club in 22, LA North in 23. A lot of other golf courses we've been involved with and fortunate to have studied and really learned and tried to appreciate the architects involved with all of them, from Tillinghast to McDonald, Rayner, George Thomas, Hugh Wilson. So it's been a great part of our education and teaching us the qualities and the characters. And already mentioned it, I think most all of us, and probably why most of you are members here, is we have this just affinity for great old golf courses, and there's just something in the bones of these courses that resonates with us, excuse me, from a playability standpoint, from a presentation standpoint, and from an enjoyment factor. And so that's something we've really, really treasured as we've gone through these experiences with all these different architects. But more importantly, from your perspective, we do have some experience with Donald Ross golf courses, and you can see them listed here. These are all clubs we currently consult at, have an involvement with, and are very proud to be there. That's the newly restored 11th hole at Aronimink. After looking at old aerial photographs from the golf course when it was constructed, which were significantly different from the plans that Ross had prepared, the club decided to go back to what was built as opposed to what was designed, and the results are now completed and will be on stage in September for the BMW Championship, which is the third leg of the FedEx Cup tournament. So you all get to see that on TV come September time. I'm going to apologize. I'm very softly spoken. And my voice goes like that. So I think they knew ahead of time. So I apologize for having to sip on this occasionally. But from an important standpoint, when we prepare master plans, we look at the golf course from a holistic standpoint. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more later about the specific elements of golf course, of the hole by holes here, but the general philosophies and really all of the recommendations that you're going to hear today are rooted in these sort of overarching general features. So the routing of a golf course. So any great golf course starts with how it's placed in the landscape. Architects of that era, Ross in particular, they were wonderful at routing golf courses. They put them in the right place. They took maximum advantage of natural characteristics on the site. They didn't have the capacity to move earth willy-nilly, so they had to make sure that they found golf holes instead of creating them. So that's why I think so many of these great old golf courses just have this sense of place, and they feel like they're rooted in the landscape that they belong on. And the routing of Worcester Country Club has not changed. So everything's intact here. We're not proposing any changes to moving golf holes around. They're all in place. And so what we refer to as sort of the skeleton, if you look at it from a body perspective, the skeleton is intact and it's in place. Now the flesh and everything, the muscle, that all comes in the features of the golf course. And every golf course architect, and Ross in particular, placed a high emphasis on greens and putting greens. And Charles Blair Macdonald once had this great quote as, "Greens are to a golf course as a face is to a portrait." It's what everybody talks about from a conditioning standpoint. It's what people remember about golf courses. It's the feature that unfortunately most of us spend the most time on when we're playing golf, because putting can be a challenge occasionally, myself included. So it's it's ultimately the culmination of the golf hole. So it's the way the golf course architect wanted you to finish that particular set of challenges. And so from the standpoint of the greens here, we're not talking about rebuilding greens. We're not talking about changing greens with the exception of the 11th hole, and I'll talk about that in particular later on, but that all gets back to and stems from the original Ross design. You've got 17 original Ross greens here, and those are fantastic. What we are talking about when it comes to greens is primarily the expansion of greens, getting them back out to the original size and scale of what Ross had anticipated. And we hear it frequently from clubs that they look at greens and they say, well, one of our defenses is our small greens. And there's a place for small greens, but typically in this time frame, architects like Ross, they built bigger greens because they wanted to have contours and they wanted to have challenges within the interior of the putting surfaces, and you can only put so much contour in on a small green. So by expanding the greens back out, you're also recapturing the scale of his presentation. You can quite easily identify it. Again, when we get back to that concept of they didn't move a lot of earth, what they did move was earth, and basically if they put the edge of a green pad in place, that's where they wanted the green. They didn't put it in place so that they could have 5 yards of rough over there. That would have been wasted time and effort. So it's quite easy to go out into the golf course and find just these sort of archaeological outlines of where the greens used to be. We also have the benefit of a really good aerial photograph. We had the benefit of photographs from the 25 US Open where players are on the golf course where we can see these features on the course. But the thing that expansion of greens does is it allows you to recapture what we call edge hole locations. And when you talk about from a challenging perspective, architects of this era did such a brilliant job of setting up their golf courses so that there were multiple options and different ways to play each and every golf hole. Well, at the end of the road on that hole, if you can take a hole location or a pin and stick it closer to a bunker, you're bringing that bunker more into play. If you put it near a drop-off or near the rough, if you can move hole locations out closer to the edge, you in theory, through the setup of that golf hole on that particular day, can make it more challenging. You can move the pin to the middle of the green and make it less challenging. But that's the brilliance of the architecture, is that these guys left behind so much flexibility, so many options and setup of the golf course. And I really think that not a lot of modern architects talk about setup as architecture, but if you leave behind golf courses that are flexible enough that they can change as much as you'd like to see them on any given day, I think that's the best examples you have of golf course architecture. So from the standpoint of expansion of greens, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Pritchard plan later on. You guys are in pretty good shape. We've done a lot of the work in moving that direction. We just think we want to finish the job as it relates to a lot of the greens and the expansions out there. Bunkers, generally regarded as sort of the most striking of all hazards or all features on a golf course. Maybe it's the contrast between white sand and green grass, or the shadowing, or the way these great old architects just cut them into landforms. They didn't just kind of pop them up out of nowhere. They set them into the ground as if they would exist naturally. So the presentation of the bunkers here, the location of the bunkers, I think is really an important thing for us to focus on. So from a presentation standpoint, we again have great old photographs. They're a little bit more rustic. They're very sharp, grass-edged bunkers. So that would be what we would look to go back if we rebuild the bunkers, would look at that from a stylistic standpoint. When you look at the bunkering on a golf course, and Brad's going to talk a little bit about this. Ross was a proponent of what we call scatter shot bunkers. So he kind of just placed them in the landscape. Sometimes they didn't have any influence on strategy. Sometimes they did. And so from that standpoint, we need to look at how has the game changed. Obviously, since he designed this golf course in the early 1900s, the game's changed dramatically. The other thing to factor in is your master plan, the Pritchard plan, was completed in around 2000. The Pro V1 did not exist. Titanium drivers did not exist in that point in time. So you're talking about a plan that the evolution of the game has changed dramatically in those 18 years. So we're really looking at, okay, how do we address and place hazards in a location, bunkers principally, that will challenge today's length, challenge a player at a course that has a championship history that perhaps might have a championship future, that's not been determined, but putting bunkers in the correct location. So you're going to see some recommendations for a handful, not a dramatic amount, but of bunkers added to the golf course, in our opinion, mimicking areas that Ross had put them in his day and age to challenge the tee shots of players. So from bunkers perspective, we're starting to look at a sort of a timeline from the standpoint of these bunkers are now 10 years old. Life expectancy on bunkers, drainage, sand, et cetera, is starting to come up. So the discussion really will need to be at some point in time, when is it time to rebuild them? And if we rebuild them, what's the proper presentation, the proper location? That's what this master plan hopefully addresses. Tees on the golf course. From a stylistic perspective, I think the rectangular tees you have now fit in perfectly, and we wouldn't stray from that at all. The one thing that we have noticed is that some of them look very artificial in the way that they're sort of popped up out of the ground. And I'll tell you the story. We consulted Taconic Golf Club over at where Williams College is, and so we're out doing a walkthrough, and there was members of the college's faculty on the green committee. And so I'm talking about these tees and how they're artificial and they're popped up. And I said, you know, these tees are popped up like Aztec pyramids out of the ground. And I hear from the background, Mayan. And I kind of turn around and I go, excuse me? And this woman professor said, the Mayans built the pyramids, the Aztecs didn't. And I was like, okay. So I stand corrected. And so I will refer to them as Mayan pyramids from today going forward. But I think the beauty of the tees, and again, remember back to that whole thought process of not moving any more earth than they actually had to. And it seems like a lot of the tees that have been added to this golf course artificially raised. So our proposal is to lower some of them, have them sit more softly in the landscape. But the primary focus from tee perspective is going to be on forward tees and back tees. And so we're looking at pushing the back tees. I think maybe 170 yards is the max we feel like we can get and still keep what we like to call a sort of connected golf course. You see so many of these great old classic golf courses where they stick in tees 70 or 80 yards back, and then you've got to, you putt and then you walk 70 or 80 yards back and then you walk 70, the same steps going forward. That I think detracts from the overall compact beauty and sort of what we love about these great old golf courses. Conversely, the forward tees, I think we're looking at reducing the forward tee yardage by about 300 to 350 yards. And that doesn't mean we're going to eliminate existing what are considered the forward tees. What it means is that we're putting in a set of tees that are actually usable and much more user-friendly for certain constituents at the club, and that would be juniors. And the vast majority, and hopefully I don't get in trouble, the vast majority of female players. Really, the golf course as it currently sits is too long. We're not taking away any of the tees from the accomplished female golfers. They can still certainly play where they're playing from now. And one of the other things this does, and I'm wading into treacherous waters, but I'm just going to say it because I think it's the truth, is that the most sort of egocentric membership at most clubs, and I'm getting close to that age, are the senior male golfers. And they don't ever want to move to the forward tees because that's, a symbol of their machismo is slipping and we don't want to go up there. Well, if you put a forward set of tees in for the vast majority of female players who are going to enjoy the game, juniors who are trying to introduce to the game, and God knows it's the most frustrating, maddening game, but it's the most beautiful, wonderful game. But to get people engaged in playing, you want to be successful. You want to go out and have fun instead of thinking, my God, why did I just spend hopefully just 4 hours playing 18 holes of golf out here. And so I think from that perspective, let's put people in a position where they can succeed and enjoy golf. That's the senior men as well. They should be playing so much further forward and just having a good time. You're not going to set course records out here anymore. Maybe there was a time when that happened, but now this takes away that stigma of playing the forward tees. And so you provide options and opportunities, and I think that's something you're going to hear us talk an awful lot about, options and opportunities and setup for golfers at a club to just go out and enjoy it. So a lot of the forward tee positioning and a lot of the back tee positioning, both ends of the spectrum, the vast majority of the middle tees, if you will, are going to stay exactly as they are. Fairways on the golf course. Golf courses of this era were much wider than modern golf courses. Think about it. It was a practical reaction to lack of fairway irrigation. Balls would bounce and go kind of every which way. It was the equipment that they mowed with. They didn't have triplex mowers. They couldn't spin these nifty little circles around. They had to build big, blocky turns. But the primary function of wide fairways was from an architectural perspective. It was Ross, it was Tillinghast, it was McKenzie, it was all these guys saying angles matter. It matters that you should get to the left side of this fairway in order to access a right hole location, if we can put the hole location over. Now think about it again, bigger greens, more angles, more options to actually get to an advantageous position. I mean, you think about risk and reward, and we hear that word a lot, and we hear TV commentators say, well, what does that actually mean? It means that you're taking a present risk to secure a future advantage. Okay, that's really the essence of what that means. And so in order to do that, if you can get to a certain spot, then you have that advantage. Well, if the fairways are only 30 yards wide, I don't know how many people in this room are good enough to get to the left side of a 30-yard wide fairway or the right side of a 30-yard wide fairway, but most golfers can't. Even touring pros hit, 8 fairways out of 18 holes? So that level of accuracy is, it doesn't lend itself, I think, to strategic architecture, nor does it lend itself to fun. So what we're talking about is recapturing some of the lost width on these fairways, making the golf course more playable. But if we do our job, and again, the brilliance of these guys is that they made golf courses that were playable, but the level of precision required to score on this golf course could be off the charts, again, based on setup. So there's a distinction between just playing a golf course, and there's a distinction between playing the golf course to try and score or post a score or shoot a low score. That level of precision, I think, really can find itself, and it seems a little bit counterintuitive, but when you provide width, you provide both of those things and how to get to it. Trees on the golf course. Usually I have water in a glass and I make a joke that I wish it was vodka when it comes to talking about trees, but I can't fake it tonight. One of the best things about the Pritchard plan, and again I'll talk more about that, is that you guys have already done most of the heavy lifting on tree removal. Brad's going to show a series of slides from the evolution of the process and the implementation of the Pritchard plan. But when we come in now, our job is to look at what's left and to evaluate these trees, and we've figured out in our minds 5 criteria that make sense for judging trees on a golf course. So we look at history. Was the golf course originally tree-lined? Was it the original design predicated on trees being an important part of the setup of the golf course or the presentation of it? At Worcester, the answer is no. We look at aesthetics. We talk about, very often what happens are trees get sort of jammed in together because trees are rarely ever planted by golf architects. They're planted by well-intentioned committees, and sort of the thought process is, well, we want instant gratification, so let's plant them close together, not thinking that somewhere down the road, 30, 40, 50 years, they're all growing into each other, and you don't have the opportunity to have any specimen trees. But you can improve the aesthetics of the landscape by eliminating trees and letting a few trees that are left over highlight the landscape, and in some instances dominate the landscape, which I think is beautiful, certainly different times of the year. Playability from an architect's perspective, that's probably the most interesting, because you read what Ross wrote, you read what Tillinghast wrote. They never, ever wanted to rely on trees to provide the strategic function of a golf hole. They just felt like that they were too arbitrary in the penalty that they extracted. They didn't allow players to exhibit their skill set. If I'm 12 handicap and I'm in the rough and I've got to come over a bunker to a green that's sloping away from me. Well, if I'm playing with a 2 handicap, he can show his skill level. I've got then to make a choice. Do I want to attempt that? And most of us do the stupid thing and we attempt the impossible shot. And we put ourselves in more trouble as opposed to a tree which ultimately just dictates to you that, okay, you're going to punch out sideways. And I would make the argument that I could probably do that just as well as a 2 handicap. And so it limits and restricts the skill. It takes away also these angles that we've been talking about. It takes away the width. And when you think about it again, these trees are all planted because what happens? Well, we get fairway irrigation. So now we can only water a certain amount so the fairways come in. Well, now we've got all this extra space off to the sides. Well, what do? Well, we don't want to just look at rough, so we plant trees. We fill the spaces. And then it becomes more of a self-fulfilling prophecy because what do the trees do? They grow and they start to go this way and everything gets narrower and narrower. It's the evolution of almost every classic golf course in this country. And it's something that's happened here, but we've peeled a lot of, you fortunately have peeled a lot of that away. Safety, it's an issue. I'll talk a little bit about that on the trees between holes 2 and 3. You know, there are places in a landscape on a compact old golf course where trees can actually provide some safety benefits. But what we find is that more often than not, they restrict visibility. And really the best way for you to understand if a ball's coming at you is if you can see it, or the golfer who's hit it can see you. None of us like to yell for. It's an admission of an errant shot, so we just would rather, if I can't see somebody on an adjoining fairway and I just pump a ball over there, I'm not going to say anything. So there are elements of trees that actually are not good from a safety perspective. So that's criteria number 4. And then really the most important one is agronomy. And you know, the simple fact of the matter is that trees take everything that grass needs to live, light, air, water, and they do a much better job of it. I mean, think about the root structure of a tree versus the root structure of grass. It's not a fair fight. And if you're at a club and you have a requirement or the thought that the conditioning needs to be at a certain standard, well, then you've got to ask some really hard questions about whether the tree stays or whether you just accept the fact that we can't grow turf underneath this tree or in this particular section of a green. And again, I get in trouble for saying this, but if it comes down to that question, in our opinion, the tree has to lose. So when you see recommendations for tree removal, they're going to fall somewhere in those 5 categories. And there's going to be basically a thought process attached to each of them. It's not just that Gil hates dogwoods or he doesn't like willows or whatever. There really is a lot of thought that goes into it because we realize as well as anybody how controversial this can be. And then ultimately, finally, and then I'll shut up, rough and fescue. A lot of older golf courses utilized these big expanses of native grasses. And what you have here is, fortunately, you have scale. Native grasses look bad when they're in small little patches or thin little ribbons that run between holes. If you have areas, and I get it, anywhere on a golf course is in play, but what we've tried to say is if a reasonably struck golf shot can go in this area, then you probably shouldn't have this. Or it needs to be maintained in a fashion that you can go in, and the question isn't, will I find my ball? The question is, when I find my ball, what type of lie am I going to have? What type of shot do I have to hit? And that takes a lot of work. I mean, there's a lot of sort of people think, oh, well, you just let the grass grow. No, if you let the grass go, that's all Heinz 57 out there. There could be bluegrass, POA, bent grass, there's everything that's on this property. It takes time to establish this in a proper fashion and in a proper density so that you get the playability you want, but you also get the aesthetic appeal and the contrast between the green grass and the taller brown roughs. So all of these components that I've just talked about form the basis for the individual recommendations that we've made in the hole-by-hole sheets, in which I'll come and talk about. And you're probably already tired of hearing me talk, but I'm only going to talk about 4 or 5 holes. I'm not ducking any holes. We have them all queued up if you have any questions, but trust me, if I tried to do 18, we'd all be asleep. So I think it's really touching on the ones that have sort of, that really embrace the more dramatic alterations that are being proposed, and I don't think we're really proposing any serious alterations to the golf course. I think we're proposing more refinements to it, but the ones that could be perceived as being more dramatic are the ones that I'm going to talk about. But in the Q&A, if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Bradley Klein, the author of this very fine book. But I'm going to get back up. So,
That was pretty good, Gil. I like that. My name is Brad Klein. The one thing Artie didn't mention, I have an academic background training. I actually spent 5 years here in Worcester teaching at Holy Cross and then Clark. But I got bored grading blue books, and in my spare time I started doing golf journalism. I'd already been a tour caddy in the summer. I had to get away from grad school. So I kind of evolved, and my academic training was very helpful because I spent 3 years researching this book and visited all of Ross's houses, including here in Worcester where he lived. I believe it was 1915 and 16, after he built Worcester Country Club. He lived up past Doherty High School, up on the hill. I have the address in the book somewhere. And by the way, the book is for sale there, and if you're interested, Frank Hannigan of the USGA used to say, if you don't have 2 serious conflicts of interest, you have no business in the golf industry. So anyway, I spent a lot of time researching this book, and the beauty of Ross, more than any other architect, is the detail and the extent of his plans and the consistency and the evolution and the way he scripted out his thinking, and you can discern it in the plans that he wrote and his memos and his notes to his various design associates down at the Pinehurst Resort where he had his office from 1899 to 1948. So there's a tremendous amount of material, and I think there's a better understanding of his thinking and the evolution of it. This was early on in his career. He evolved in his own work because he was designing back then with hickory shafts and a golf ball that kind of went like this when it flew, and a 200-yard drive was a big hit then. So that explains also why some of the bunkers are where they are. But he also understood that he was trying to capture a certain kind of beauty of the nature of the landforms, and so that's one of the things that really informs Gil's work here. We sort of have studied this pretty carefully. This is Ross. I always like to say of all the Golden Age architects, Golden Age of architecture is essentially between World War I and II, roughly. And of all the people doing golf course architecture, he was the only one who was still sober and working at 5 p.m. And if you know Tillinghast or McDonald or Mackenzie, that's true. The other thing is Pinehurst was a dry town, so there was nothing else to do. Now, the great thing is that Gil and his wife Tracy are now living in the Ross house while they're doing the number 4 course. And this photo is gradually making the rounds. It's going to go viral soon. I've been involved on a consulting basis. This is Gil's show. I'm just helping out. I'm just the water boy, if you will, trying to help lend an extra set of eyes and ears, try to find some material, interpretation. I've got a lot of experience. A lot of it is working with clubs and decision-making and politics, and this is where my political science background comes in really handy. And I've been involved with a lot of restorations on the Ross side in particular. I'm not going to read through all of them, but there are a lot of them. And what's great is that you're going through the same thing that a lot of premier clubs are going through. And you're at an advantage because for a lot of reasons, you didn't screw up the golf course really badly. You didn't move holes. You didn't try to reroute for real estate. So there's a lot of as Gil beautifully said, the bones of the golf course are there. The connectivity, the walkability, the ease of which you roll off from one green to the next tee. All of that is right there, and that's a beautiful thing. It's a really, and the other thing is that the routing goes to the limits of the property. He really pushed the envelope here in a way. Now that means that it's a little difficult to find a lot of yardage, but it also means that it fills the space beautifully, and it's not back and forth. It's the beautiful path you're walking. There's a lot of aerial photography starting in the 30s that helps us determine the golf course. And starting the clubhouse number 1 around front 9. And this is a really great x-ray, if you will, or a plan to start with what was a pretty good impression of the bunkering, the scatter shot bunkering. I think a lot of you who play modern golf courses, and this started with Robert Trent Jones in the 50s, really, for a lot of reasons, they started putting bunkers left and right at 250, 260 for the back tee for the great golfers, and the idea was to hit it in the middle. And the bunkers were a punishment if you varied offline, so the play was down the middle. And the interesting thing there is that there was no real incentive for that bunker strategy. There was no incentive to try to carry a bunker. You were just in rough. So it forced everybody down the middle. And I think golf, a lot of us think, that golf suffered because we got used to sort of playing a one-dimensional game. And it became an aerial game and a power game. And it was all devised really to test, and that's when golf started to get hard, and the mark of a great golf course was it difficult? And you had these images of US Opens where they were marching single file down the middle with knee-high rough on both sides, and that was, what was it, the massacre at Winged Foot, 1974, when Hal Irwin, I think he won it 7 over par. Well, maybe he could make it 7 over par for 4 days, but what was the average 16 handicap going to do? They're going to shoot 100 every day and get beat up. That's not fun. So I think there's been an evolution of the game. For the tour player, or for the championship golfer, should be a demanding test, but the golf course serves a lot of different audiences. And I'm sort of the view, and a lot of people are, that the back tees shouldn't really determine what the severity of the test is. I have a saying about this, that the people who play the back tees don't pay the bills. Most of them are industry comps. And so if you... And as I'm getting older, I also find out all my friends are playing 61, 6,200 yards. Bandon Dunes, where Artie's going to go, 95% of the rounds are played at 6,300 yards. And it's not just women. It's if you have a swing speed of 60 or 70 miles an hour, that's the forward tees. Or if you're a senior golfer, your swing speed might be 80 or 85. And if you're a really good player, it might be 100. The tour guys are at 115. That's a completely different game. So what's fascinating is the golf course has to accommodate a far wider variety of play and distance and trajectories than was ever the case. So that's a very demanding thing. And so the most important thing for a country club, you're paying a lot of money, you want to have fun, you want to have the ability to be challenged. You have some variety in those tees, but the variety has to be in front of you. The variety behind you is not that important. You're not going to host another US Open anyway. You'd have to be 8,000 yards these days. But there are lots of great championships you could host that could be played at 6,400 yards, 6,100 yards, and that's a perfectly reasonable and I think really realistic expectation for the club given its history. And so one of the things you try to do is you look at the aerials and you get a sense of the openness of the site. It's a big piece of land here and you have a feel for it. There are a lot of golf courses by the 60s and 70s that got so heavily planted that you're looking single file. Every hole was, sort of surrounded by trees, and no one ever wanted. I have this theory that at most clubs, a lot of the members hate each other and they don't want to see anybody else, so this is their way. But lo and behold, some of these people are your friends, your family, and it's actually really cool to go outside and actually look around and see the beauty of the site. And that's part of the beauty of a golf course. It's not just about playing and scoring. It's about enjoying a walk 3.5, 4 hours and scanning the horizon and this fascinating land, because most of it's being chopped up and built up, and the golf course is one of the few remaining undeveloped sites where God's hand and nature are really at play, and to have a contact with that is a really special thing to have available. The evolution of the golf course here, one of the things that's great about Ross, as I said, is he documented a lot of his work. He did a pamphlet. He was very self-promotional as a businessman. And in 1930, he issued a pamphlet describing or listing all of his work. And we have an original copy of this. And if you look here in Massachusetts, right here, right there, Worcester Country Club. So he was proud of this. He listed it as one of his achievements. And so there's a lot of documentation. So there's no question about that. When it comes to sites, you sort of look for these pristine sites. When you get a place like Whitensville down the road, where we met Artie, I'm glad I don't remember how miserable that day is, but there's a reason why architects and writers have really good rain gear. And one of the things that's actually interesting, because we all play at different levels, but we all kind of walk and talk and love to do that, and it's amazing how much fun it is. I love walking golf courses, partly because I never miss a shot that way, but it's also, there's so much more you see when you're paying attention to the landforms rather than your swing or your, the shot you have in front of you. So it is amazing, if you take a course walk, how slow in an hour, if you cover 3 holes, that's a lot. There's always a lot to capture. At Whitensville, we had this wonderful aerial, and they got about 9 pine trees in the middle of the golf course, but the rest was wide open, and it was an easy landscape to read. And goodness knows, they were broke and never had any changes to their course, exception of the second green, so it was kind of easy to get it back. That was a kind of template, if you will, about how restoration can be easy when the landforms are available in front of you. You get into real trouble in a real estate property or a resort when you have all sorts of contending issues, or when you have issues about stormwater management and all the messy part of the work that Gil does. But I think the beauty of a site like this is you're really just dealing with the landforms, and they're right there in front of you. And to reveal them is a really exciting task. And by the way, when we talk about revealing, it doesn't mean stripping the golf course. Oakmont and what they did with their trees, that's one model. There are lots of different ways to do that. So trees have a place on a golf course in terms of the perimeter, and there are lots of areas where they work well in copses. So it's not about, none of this is about stripping bare the golf course. But it is about revealing the original landforms that Ross saw and recapturing them 100 years later. And the historic photography is pretty good here. Certainly more than most places. They took lots of photographs at opening day and over the years, and you've had these great championships. And so this is looking down the first hole from the tee. I think this is looking south. Is that right? Yeah. It's looking south. And it gives you a sense of the site. So when you go out there now, as I did this afternoon, go ahead. Pretty good job of recapturing the feel of the place. Unfortunately, the one incursion that Ross never had to deal with, modern architects do, are cart paths. And so you try to either hide them or reduce their presence, and that's part of the plan as well, is to reduce the fact that you're looking at them all the time. But the main thing is to expand and recapture the width of the, and by the way, one of the things you can do with modern fairways now is you can get back to the original width because of modern irrigation. When Ross was designing fairways, they were 50, 60 yards wide. Then they put irrigation down the middle, and it could only throw 30 yards total. Everything outside of that couldn't be maintained as fairways because they had single row irrigation down the middle. Now with multiple heads and spacing, you can actually keep wider fairways green with less water because it's more efficient. You're not throwing the water as far. So the modern irrigation actually helps recapture the classic feel and sensibility of a golf course. It's one of the neat technical developments that has really, I think, helped dramatically in capturing the width of the fairways. Go ahead. And again, the width, the scale, the second hole here from the top of the hill, really the openness of it, you get a really good sense here. That's a fascinating kind of glacial moraine that you have, that moraine ridge and the fall off, and that really is part of the beauty of the golf course, and Ross certainly made great use of that on this property.
If anything, we're trying to build on to that legacy and onto that restorative aspect of what he proposed to this club as it relates to Donald Ross and what he left behind here at Worcester Country Club. So just wanted to kind of talk about that, get that out in the open, as I really feel strongly that we're not trying to erase the great work that he did here. I think we're really just trying to follow on it, and I think we can add on to it. I honestly do. So you look at it here sort of from an implementation standpoint, you look at August of 2003, fast forward to July of 2007, you're starting to see some of the tree removals, you're starting to see some of the implementation of the golf course master plan, and then here we are now. So, as I said, you guys have done a ton of the heavy lifting. I mean, you really have as it relates to things out here. So we're just continuing to follow on And based on those principles that I echoed before, and based on the research that Brad just touched on, and our belief that the continuation of this restoration will only take this golf course to higher levels, make it more playable, more enjoyable for everybody, and through the setup of the golf course, more challenging if the club desires to do so. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through, as I said, I think 4 holes. All of these plans are upstairs in the room. They've been available since Friday. They'll be available. I don't know how long they're going to be up there. Probably up until your meeting in 2 weeks' time, so you can review them, you can look at them. Certainly, I think that they're fairly easy to follow. We stole, borrowed, copied, whatever you want to say, this format for our whole designs from Donald Ross and William Flynn. I don't know who stole what from each other, but it was what we felt was a very clear and concise methodology of presenting the golf hole. When you look at them, all the boxes on there are 10 yards, so you can figure out the distance between things, et cetera, et cetera. The annotations on the side show basically letter A, and it goes up with letter A on the plan and describes what we're proposing. So I'm just going to start and go from tee to green on hole number 3. Letter A is that we're proposing to move the tee back about 15 yards. There's also a note that if that restroom is ever removed in that area, we could potentially move the tee back even further on this hole, which I think would work out quite nicely from the perspective of where it sits. Letter B is rebuild the tees, shifting them ever so slightly further to the left, which we believe is the original line of play on the golf hole, looking at the old aerial photographs. C, lowering, reducing the height of that tee because the forward tee really pops up out of the ground, as I described earlier, Mayan pyramid. And extending it about 5 yards forward. Letter D, we really like the connection over to the 5th fairway, so we're proposing to just make that transition just a little bit cleaner as opposed to so pointed. E is to expand the fairway out slightly, and then orient that bunker and push it a little bit further out into the hole so it really sets the edge for that left-hand side of the fairway. Letter F, looking at the aerial photographs, we noticed that there was originally a connection between these 2 holes of fairway going through. There was an extended area of rough, and the connection was actually a little bit further up, closer to the greenside bunker on hole number 3, but there were no trees in that area. And so we thought long and hard about this, and it was one of those areas where we felt like from a variety standpoint we could offer different options, different thoughts from a play standpoint. You're down in one of those little kettle holes, so if your ball goes down in there, it's a really interesting proposition. I don't know if anybody would purposely try and hit it into that area. I don't think it provides an advantage for either hole. And this got down to that safety question. Okay, are you safer if you can't see something, making the best golf course, the best golfing experience out here? I run a bulldozer. I really don't like to run a chainsaw, so I'm not going to show up and cut those trees down. So it's, again, from an implementation standpoint, the same thing with the bunkers, the locations, and the ways to pursue this. But I just want to make that very clear, is that it's a guideline for you to move forward. If you go through the picture plan, there are probably half a dozen or more things that were never implemented because the membership felt like that wasn't really the right thing. Ron still believes very strongly that those are the right things for the golf course. We feel strongly what we're proposing is the right thing for the club, but ultimately it's up to you to implement, and the decision-making is best for you as well. Letter G, reconfiguration of that bunker, getting more in scale and in context with the original bunker as per the aerial photographs. Same thing on the green side bunker. You'll notice this little box down here. On future plans and other plans, you'll see that there's proposed green expansion. The 3rd green, we're not proposing to expand. We think that you've done a great job of recapturing the original scale and size of it, so we're not proposing any restoration to that. And then I think really the one more critical aspect, and Brad mentioned cart paths, I cannot stand cart paths. It is without a doubt the one thing that drives me crazy more than anything, because as Brad mentioned, part of the beauty of this layout is that these great architects, just tee to green, walk was very close. And all of a sudden we've got to figure out how we get an asphalt scar in between, and how we make that work, and how is it convenient for somebody who's in a cart in order to get off, et cetera, and all these different complicated factors that ultimately intrude on the landscape. So when we look at cart paths, we try to do so with an eye towards removing them from view. If that means that we ultimately have to sacrifice convenience in a certain area, I think that's important. It's more important from a golfer's perspective to have a pristine landscape as it is, as opposed to, in my opinion, for sort of the convenience of 10 yards less to walk to get to the tee. So on this particular area, we're proposing to move the cart path down below, down along the right-hand side, cutting it in. I know it doesn't look like it'll fit there, but trust me, I think it will. And it also then will remove another one of my pet peeves is on a great old classic golf course when you walk off the green to the next tee, you have to cross the cart path. And I think that this really sets up and simplifies and makes a very clean transition, which honors the footprint that Ross left behind, and I think ultimately just presents the golf course in a much, much better fashion. Hole number 7. So the tee complexes, I was looking at the aerial photograph earlier, and there's like all these like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tee boxes all just kind of staggered up and down the hill. On hole number 6, we're proposing to remove a couple of the upper tee boxes on 7 and slide everything down a little bit lower, consolidate, get the cart path out of the view on hole number 6. Restore the fairway, which Ross used and basically set there for you, allow you to run the ball onto the green, and shifting the focus of the tees a little bit further down the hill. So we're consolidating, taking a few of those upper ones, but still keeping the distance roughly the same. So you see A, B, and C are all tee relocations. Letter D is an expansion of the fairway over to the right-hand side, which we think embraces the landscape a little bit better. Is a lot closer to the original intent that Ross had. Letter E, there are 3, I believe they're locusts down the left-hand side. Taking those out, opening up that landscape into that area, and then putting in bunker in G, which is really in place for the longer hitter. There's a lot of divots in that spot, so I think it's fairly popular. It's right into that little ridge And ultimately, if you look at the risk reward of this hole, I'll try and speak loudly. But basically, the player who bites off as much as they can chew in this fashion is really the challenging shot, the way Ross had the hole set up, because then it's an unimpeded shot into the green. The golfer who plays out over here really has got to be, just needs to be sort of a bailout area. So with the way the game is played now, with the length that people are hitting it, it felt like it was important to try and challenge the golfer to make them have to focus more on the intended line of play. Letter H is just some thinning of trees along that side, but just really pruning branches that are overhanging. I is the restoration of the bunkers in the approach area. J, you can see the green expansion down in the lower box, so expanding to the front right, back left, front left. And then K is the removal of the bunker over the back of the green, which was not part of the original design. Hole number 11. Up at the tee box, looking at letter A, an expansion back of about, I think, 12 yards. There's a little bit of room up there on that plateau, rebuilding, resetting. B, letter C would be to build a new forward tee, which is about 20 yards forward of the current forward tee, which is here. So moving that up there, again, retaining the existing forward tee so that the setup of the golf course for ladies competitions can stay in the same area. Letter D is rebuild the bunkers, scatter shot bunkers in place. E is a slight expansion of the fairway just to straighten out the line, trying to make it feel more matching up with Ross's design. Letter F would be rebuilding the existing fairway bunker and then adding another one further down, again for the more accomplished player who can hit it past that first fairway bunker. We opted not to remove the original Ross bunker, thinking that we could add a second one and keep the original one in place. And then when we get up to the green, what we were talking about is this is not an original Ross green. The original Ross green sat much lower in the landscape. We've had the opportunity from an archaeological perspective to unearth greens and bunkers that have been covered over a period of time. And unless Worcester is different than 99% of other golf courses, when they got rid of the original Ross green, they just covered it. It was basically dirt on top of it. If you get somebody who's talented on an excavator, they can literally dig and dig and dig and then find that layer. All of a sudden you'll see a change in the layer because it was either dead grass or it was soil. And the soil that they piled on top of it would have been completely different because it was just fill material. So we've been successful in going back and finding the original grade. I'm not going to guarantee you that we can find every single square foot of it or inch of it, but I think given the photographs and the history of the club and these archaeological clues, we can restore that green to much closer to what it was. And what it was, aside from the flagstick, from what we can tell, a blind green. I mean, you're playing up over the ridge and down into it. Had punch bowl characteristics that had support in the back and support at the sides.
I think on a property like this and a golf course of this vintage, that type of hole is absolutely appropriate for this golf course. I don't think it'll be gimmicky, I don't think it'll be Mickey Mouse, I think it'll be probably one of the more interesting, dare I say, fun golf shots that you hit anytime out here. And the key thing is it's not my idea, it's not Brad's idea, it was Donald Ross's idea. There was some point in time, again, we talk about these well-intentioned committees, they chose in the 1960s to elevate and raise that green and go away from the Ross design. You as a club, nearly 20 years ago, decided that you're going back to Ross and you're embracing that history and that restorative effort. We think, and when Ron wrote this very clearly in his master plan, he felt very strongly that this is something that should be done as well. So this would be the one green that we would propose to rebuild. It can be done in a fashion, we'll work with Adam very closely to make sure the soils match up. We're not talking about building a USGA green where this is the one green out there that's going to play differently from all the others. We would look at constructing it with a methodology so it would be very similar. We could take the sod off of this green, put it right back in, so that the grass and the consistency would match up. So there are all kinds of ways that we can go about doing this that will retain that consistency but restore the architectural quality to the green, and we feel strongly that this is something that should be done. Bunkers would be reconfigured in that fashion, which, again, if you think about his day and age, in order to get to a blind green, this kind of approach is running down into it, you need to challenge the approach. So where do you put the bunkers? You put in a new approach. So you want to hit it straight in that area. So it all makes perfect architectural sense. Letter I would be just a thinning and some trees behind the green. Again, if we're dropping into a lower elevation, that's not great from an airflow standpoint, so we would go in and thin out some trees and try to create a little more airflow. And the last one, I promise. 15. So this is again where we get back to a situation where a tee was added to create length. We get into the pyramid shape of it, but we also get into the location of it, which doesn't go from the original line of play that Ross had intended, which is where the other tees are set up. And I can only surmise that the reason is that there's a shelter. And so they decided not to move the shelter, let's move the tee, change the aspect of the hole. Well, this master plan would contemplate moving the shelter and putting the tee where it should be, back in line with the other tees, keeping the distance, lowering the elevation of the tees and forward of the back tee, which would then allow us to lower this tee down. And that's where I think some of the differentiations, and it's a fresh set of eyes, it's a fresh look at the golf course. It's not philosophically radically different from what Ron proposed, it's just the implementation we would look at doing slightly different. There's a knock-on effect from every feature on a golf hole, and if you don't take out the shelter, then you're going to wind up over here. If you don't lower the forward tees, then you're going to wind up at a certain elevation. Our belief is that you look at this holistically, you look at how do we make the best possible. We're going to have a back tee, let's make it in character with everything else that was done on the golf hole, instead of making it out of character in order to fit everything that precedes it. Down the fairway, we'll be looking at connecting the 15th fairway with the 11th fairway. Over at the start there, we'll be looking at adding a forward tee C, which is again 20 yards downrange, sitting up on a nice little ridge. We would look at adding bunkers F there's a nice ridge that sits up in there again from the back tee. That would be sort of 300 to 325. Again, with modern equipment from the back tees, we think on par 5 in particular, it's right to challenge. It gets a little bit to sort of the scattershot bunker patterns that exist on 11 and 15 out in this big field. We think that they fit into the landscape nicely. Letter G would be a continuation of thinning some of the trees along the boundary area. Letter H is something that, looking at this golf hole and knowing sort of the strategy of Ross and the thought process of the second shot on par 5, we would propose actually breaking the fairway off there and having that hillside as it goes up abruptly, which just maintain rough, not fescue, not bunkers, but basically saying you either need to get up top or you're down below. There's no middle ground. So while we were contemplating this thought, I texted Brad and I said, any examples of Ross, breaking off par 5s? Within like 10 minutes, stuff comes back. I texted Chris Bowie, who's written another book on Donald Ross. Within 15 minutes, more examples came back. It's not what he did at Worcester, but we think given the modern game, given the presentation of the landscape, it's really would be a nice and striking differentiation in the way that you present the hole, in the way that you play it. And I think it adds to the task of that sort of second shot on a par 5. If it's momentous in pulling off a shot, I think there's so much more satisfaction in that as opposed to just sort of being able to continue to play without much decision. If you don't make it, well, it comes back down. I think this would really set up the landscape quite nicely. Letter J, planting a tree that might ultimately become a specimen to kind of hug that inside corner for the tree that was lost. Expansion of fairway on the upper part, because it is sort of blind getting up there, so we're going to give you a little bit more room. And then reconfiguration of the bunkering to match the aerial photograph, which is the pattern depicted here. And then the creation of some short grass off of the back into those little swales, which I think would add some character to it. So those are 4 examples, and those are probably the most dramatic things we're proposing on the golf course. Most everything else are tweaks and fairway pushes and pulls, bunker reconstructions, green expansions, all the things I've touched on before. So I encourage you to go look at all 18 holes. Certainly you'll have time to do that before your vote in 2 weeks. I think with that, I'm going to give the stage back to Brad. He's going to go over a few more points, and then after that, we're open for questions and answers. Thank you.
Just one thing, the aerials actually show on 15 that that was broken ground. It was not maintained fairway, so that, don't blame Gil for that. That was, it was his version of Hell's Half Acre from Pine Valley, in effect. And it's a really cool sort of interior strategic demand that you had. With that. All we want to do is leave you with the fact you've got a beautiful piece of land here, and the goal of this restoration is to enhance your appreciation and to just give you a couple of examples of getting it right or wrong. Inverness, outside Toledo, Ohio, has gone through Ross course, gone through a major restoration. They have a brook running through, and all I'm going to tell you is it looks really cool. It's Ross deliberately routed the holes, interrupted fairway, by the way. On a par 5 there. Now the 12th hole. It was his 12th hole, yeah. That's a good example, actually. And so all you're doing is enhancing the sensibility, the elevation change, and creating more of an awareness of the beauty and the challenges that the land presents. A couple more. The other thing is simplifying the mowing. I'm going to show you some examples of, here's a real simple mowing pattern. You got fairway, you got rough. That's it. Which is, by the way, easier to maintain, a little less expensive. And it looks really cool because it enhances the landforms because now you're going from fairway at whatever they're cut, 3/8 of an inch, maybe a half inch, to rough. 2 inches maybe. That's a neat transition. When you go to intermediate, now you lose a lot of that sense of the landform. In order to accommodate that, when you get rid of the intermediate, your fairways get wider to cover up that area. So you're actually expanding the fairways and you're creating more contrast. I know that there are people who think that it's unfair that you miss the fairway by 3 inches and you're in 2-inch rough. Well, don't miss the fairway. It's minor. So, there's a part of golf that's unfair, but it's really cool. This is what you don't want. This is Oakland Hills. I think this is why the superintendent left. He got tired, which he just did. He got tired of 5 layers of cut. Green, apron, actually 1, 2, 3, 4 layers. We got green, apron, intermediate, and then full rough. This is ridiculous. All you're trying to do, I don't know why, is you maybe impress the USGA to get an Open Championship back, but they're not even impressed by this anymore. So this kind of layered cut, you lose the sense of the transition and the landforms when you do this. A couple of other examples. This is kind of slightly humorous, but we're getting near an open bar, so. This is cluster. This is actually a course. Actually, this is interesting because Gil and I have both worked on this golf course. This is early in his career. He's getting to zone it, and I'm not. It's Kent Square in Philly, and there are a lot of things going on here. They got a range that's too small. They got a lot of stalls. They got benches. They got par 8. litter baskets. My favorite, just to show you what happens when you overdo it, is trying to do too much, is the practice bunker oriented toward the clubhouse. When I pointed out to them that people in practice bunkers tend to need practice, and now you're blading shots into the pool. This is what you want to avoid. You've got a much cleaner look out there. You want to keep it this way. Go ahead. There's no end to how bad you can find. I love showing bad photographs. This is an Ivy League college campus golf course, Hanover Country Club. And look, this is their signage on the 9th hole, which is right by the police station, which is appropriate because frat row is right behind it. But this is what you don't want to do. So just whenever you get mad at Artie and think you have a brilliant idea that why don't we have ball washers on every hole, and towels, and benches, and shade trees, and signage, and yardage, and maybe we should have yardage markers that have front, middle, and back of the green, as well as red, white, and blue flags to indicate if the green is front, middle, or back, in addition to the handheld laser units you have. This is what's called kind of dopey overkill, so keep it simple. And if you think that, this tree stuff, there's only one golf course in the country that's been planting trees the last 15 years. That's Augusta, and you can thank that tree on the left side of the 18th hole for ruining Jordan Spieth's chances to win the Open. It was a ridiculous tree. They've been trimming them deliberately to form an arch. He finally got caught, and they're using trees here to trick up the golf course, which is a shame. So you're in the right company here on the right side of things. Go ahead. The other thing that's really cool, I'm seeing this, is a small little thing. Accessories, little things count. Old wooden rakes. It's an old golf course. It's got a great history. And what we're trying to do here, and what Guild is doing in a really thoughtful way, is letting history live. And you do that in lots of little ways, sometimes even with the choice of rakes, which is really cool. Or flags or insignia. And all that is kind of a branding. It's a way of saying we're different, we're special, we're simple, we're old-fashioned, and we're an old kind of golf club. And that's really what you are. The more you emphasize walking out here, it's a very walkable golf course. It's a little bit of a slog up 7 and 9, I know, but still, the connections are there. And it's a really special place. And I know that's why Gil's in demand a lot, and he's turning down lots of jobs. And the fact that he's interested and curious and always looking at things and trying to find out, what's that bunker over there? It's a constant process of discovery. It's a really exciting place, and it's great working with Artie on this project. I think one more. That's it.
Well, I think that was a great presentation. As Gil mentioned, the old boardroom is where the sketches are. We hope there'll be a lot more interest in the next couple of weeks so you can see all the holes. But we'll entertain questions now and disperse them to the right person. Billy.
Yeah. Thanks to Gil. You guys for caring about our course. Thanks for coming. On 11, I mean, I'm 75, but I remember caddying here when I was 12 years old. And I don't know if the aerial view showed it, but there were two cross bunkers about 140 yards from where the green is today. And I seem to remember that the original green was shorter and to the left and pretty flat and not much of the green.
Yeah, you're gonna be over there. Thank you.
For those of you that might not have heard Bill, it was about some bunkers crossing the fairway on 11.
Now we're gonna try to find the old area.
Oh, they're gonna try to find the old area.
See what it looks like.
I mean, it's over 60 years. I mean, I don't know. No, they weren't. There were two big eyebrow bunkers. And there were little 10-foot walk in between.
All right, so. Yeah, so 30, I don't know who put those in, but Ross did. So that's, you can see it here. You can see the big bunkers we talked about, and then the small bunker here. And you can tell there's some depth to that because the shadow on the bunker would indicate that there was something that was up. So I don't know if it was altered prior to them redoing it or if it had been changed several times. I'm not sure of the history of that, but clearly here at 38, obviously this is 20 years after the golf course was designed, but they're not in place at that point in time, so that's why we didn't put them in.
One other thing, can you, with all the bunkers, I mean, just it's a massive number of bunkers. I mean, what does it cost? What does it cost? I mean, you must have, you got a good idea. I mean, what does it cost for the tees and the bunkers, present day, to do the work?
Do the work, and this is you're gonna think this is a Clintonian answer. It's not. Bill, not Hillary.
Depends on what the definition of a bunker is.
We haven't priced it out, and I'm serious. I have not. Now I can give you the square footage costs of doing it, but I don't even know how many square feet.
I mean, the bunkers are $1 million?
No, not these. The answer is because we decided, and we've done this at every single club we've ever been at, we don't want the board or the committee to decide what makes the plan based on cost. Because if you start picking it apart and go, well, that bunker's $10,000, okay, let's cut that out. We want to give you our best ideas. And then hopefully this membership accepts the plan. And then you figure out how to pay for it. Then you start to say, listen, it's been 18 years since Pritchard did his plan. It's not finished yet. So we're not sure if you're going to take 18 years to implement this plan, assuming it's accepted, or if you're going to take 3 years, or you're going to take 6 years. So there's no point in scaring anybody now or saying, hey, this is what's coming down the road. We want a decision based on, this is a good plan, we're excited about this plan, and then ultimately it's up to the leadership of the club to come back to you and say, this is how we'd like to implement it, this is the cost associated.
I think it's great,
Well, thank you.
but I think it's unrealistic not to tell us approximately what it's going to cost.
Agree. I don't think that and I don't want to wait.
I mean, we all have a budget. We all have a budget.
But we're not asking you to approve the implementation of it. I think that's at a later date. What they're asking you to say is this where you want to head? Is this where you want to go? And if it is, then obviously you have a bylaw change that needs to be adopted in order to go down this road. And then, that conversation is for if the board walks in here and says, a year from now, hey, we want to borrow $10 million to do this golf course, well, then that's when you say this is not realistic. So I hope you understand that.
No, I like everything you did. Thank you for your presentation. I just think I think it's helpful to everybody to know what it costs, and before they make their decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken, Bill, but I think that, get back to what Gil was saying, we don't know what everything's going to cost, and we don't know when we're going to approach it, and what we're going to do, and what priorities are. Okay, I think that's going to be left to Artie's committee. It's going to be left to the board of governors, and it's going to be left to a special committee that we're going to put together to say, okay, this is Gil's plan, and we think that from a membership standpoint, the priority should be here, and then we start pricing it out. Okay, and maybe we looked at where do we get our biggest bang for the buck initially in the plan, and what can we do? Because a lot of this, Gil mentioned in the meeting to the board, is this guy here, Adam, can do a lot of this work. Okay, and so some of it will be done just through normal type maintenance, and then some of it, obviously, we need to bring in the pros. Okay, and at that point, when we do tackle, say, the bunker project, which is probably by far going to be the most expensive part of it, we then have to price it out, and we have to then, clearly it's going to be more than $200,000. We're back to you, okay, just like we're with the maintenance facility, and we're asking you that, okay, this is what we'd like to do, here's how we're going to pay for it, okay, and we're asking you, the membership, to approve it, okay.
thank you very much, Bill, for caring about our course.
Gil, what have been the most successful restorations you think you've been a part of? What do you think the membership did that made it successful?
I think from a sort of a turnaround, probably Los Angeles Country Club and the North Course there, I think was probably the most successful. And I think what the membership did was, that was almost like us being in Ron Pritchard's shoes here 20 years ago. It was us saying, hey, you need to care about George Thomas. You need to figure out what Thomas did, and let's go and erase everything else that had been done to this golf course over a period of time. And that guy, he was a genius. I mean, it's unfortunate that he only built, 10 golf courses, because boy, he was terrific. And so I think it's that studying and understanding, it's the studying and understanding Ross. It's really sort of getting into their skin and just understanding what they did at that specific golf course. I think that's one of the things that Brad and I are really proud of, is that we felt like we researched this. We didn't ever rely on, well, typically Ross built, greens like course number 2. No, he didn't. He actually didn't even build greens like that on course number 2. But it's really, what did he do here? What specifically was he doing at that stage in his career? And that's what LA Country Club was. And I think the membership was skeptical, as they should be. I mean, they were happy with their golf course. It was difficult for them to see how it could become much better, but they let us work. And then eventually then it just, the train starts rolling, and all of a sudden it's, go ahead, cut down every tree you want. He's like, wait a minute, no, that's not what we're after. I think that was probably the most successful.
How would you address the washboarding and number 2 fairway?
So I was intrigued to read in 2000 that Ron Pritchard said we need to figure out a way to solve the washboarding on hole number 2. And so it's been obviously a problem that's been plaguing superintendents and architects for a long period of time. So what our recommendation is that we engage a soil scientist. That's beyond my scope to understand where the water's coming, why it's settling, why it's doing what it is. There are a number of specialty drainage firms, there's one called Kelly Hemme, which we worked with at Wingfoot and Weano. They're not cheap, but they seem to figure out answers. So I think that would be somebody we'd ask to come in and provide some consulting services. But it's on the plan as a note saying we need to address this issue and we need to figure out how to fix it.
Mike? On the third hole that you showed, I was happy to hear about removing the cart path behind the green. I was disappointed that you didn't recommend removing the cart path.
Mike, speak up.
I'll towards the third tee. I'll repeat it if you want, but just what was the last part?
You heard what I said.
Yeah, what was the last part? I didn't hear that.
Well, I would just hope, the Pritchard plan removed that cart path coming down the second hole towards the third tee, and I was hoping you'd get rid of it all.
So the question was, it was appreciative of removing the cart path behind the third green, and then there was a question of why we didn't recommend taking out the one that comes from the third tee down the hill. That guy right there, and trust me if I could figure out a way, because this area down here, in particular, is very wet, and I just don't think you'd be able to survive. And then you get to a point where you've got tees and bunkers, and there's just really a tight spot, and I just didn't see another way around getting carts in and around that spot.
No, I don't mean take that out. I mean take it out that goes up the hill into 2.
Onto 2. So coming up this way. Yeah, that gets to a, I hate to say this, but it's the truth. It gets to be more of a liability issue. You take out a cart path going down a hill, and some, God forbid, somebody does something stupid, or then the insurance companies are coming after us, so I can't. We haven't touched wood in 25 years, had an issue like that, and I don't want to get started on it. So that was more practical reason, not one from the heart. I'd love to see it go, but just couldn't make that recommendation.
I'm glad you chose me there because it's right in the same area here. The obvious penalty on 2 is to go right and drop pounds, but left, I haven't been a member here long, but I've noticed that when you hit the ball left off the tee, if you're in that left rough, there's an awful lot of incentive to hit a mid to short iron down the hill on 3. I think you might have touched on this a little bit. And that leaves a very reasonable shot unimpeded back towards the second green. And you can end up reaching there in regulation. And that can't be what Ross intended, is what always goes through my mind. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
So the thought would be, and again, if you're hitting at a rough and the rough is decent, again, even if it's not, you've got this bunker in front of you, so you've got to carry that, and so in theory, you're going to get a bit of a flyer, and if the greens are firm enough, then that should be the defense. Okay. Yeah, so through here, that's that bunker up in there. This is that patch of fairway. You can see the light coloration through here. That's really where that idea spawned from. And again, I mentioned it was much further back. What we're showing is actually down in here.
With no tree.
With no tree. Yeah, there are no trees there in this photograph. But again, in his day and age, that would have been probably more of a landing area for players off the tee. So I think that fronting bunker, in theory, the fact that you're coming out of the rough, is probably enough penalty for players who go in that direction. It's a difficult thing to try and throttle in. I mean, if players are choosing to go that way, then that's one thing. If they just happen to get over there because they haven't hit great shots, and then you can't defend every single angle on the golf course, but I would venture to guess that that's probably pretty well defended just from that angle and that type of shot.
But most of the time when you do that, it's because you're left of the trees, or the trees are in your way for direct shot back to 2, so you go down 3, so you gain another 80 yards in there, rather than playing to the top of the hill, which would be the only other option. The trees are gone, you can shoot back at it.
Right. Good point.
And it's on a fairway.
Great job, great presentation, thanks for clarifying a few things. 2 quick questions. I believe you proposed a tee box on 9 that goes back over the tracks on the back of 17. And the first part is, we've got that train situation, I'm sure somebody brought up to you, but also from a safety standpoint, those coming around 16 right down in front there, I don't know how you attack that. And the second question I have, if you can answer, was it Donald Ross's original intention to have so many blind shots into these greens? Because I think we have at least 13 blind shots out of 18, if not 14 holes that are blind shots. And I don't know if they just grew up over time, or if that's his stamp and that's what he wants, more blind shots. So I'm listening.
Okay, so the first question about number 9, that's intended solely to be a tournament tee. You're not supposed to play that on weekends or weekdays or any other time. It's just a chance. We thought it was an interesting, creative way to gain 45 yards on a scorecard for a championship. And in theory, that class of player should be able to handle that hole, as well as the potential for traffic coming off of 16. As it relates to the other comment about blind holes, I think it probably gets to a definition of blind. If you mean uphill, and you can see the flag, but you can't see the putting surface, then yeah, if you determine that to be blind, then I think that's true. I mean, he definitely designed uphill holes. In my opinion, blind shot is where you can't see the flag, you can't see the green, you can't see anything. So I think that just gets to a determination of and I know you're a good player, and I know good players like to have definition and see kind of where they're hitting, and so it's kind of disconcerting, and trust me, a lot of guys think that that's blind and you can't see the actual surface of the green. But, I mean, Brad may touch on it, but Ross was not afraid to build uphill holes or uphill approach shots into greens, because, again, his whole thought process was maximize the landscape. And most architects like to look at tees, elevated tees and elevated greens as kind of the pinnacle for what you can achieve in design. So it's not surprising he chose a lot of elevated green sites.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question that's always been curious about is whether there's any evidence of a grip when we evolve. Whether it was ever open, or whether this was a kind of dry up,
The question is there a brook crossing the 18th hole? And it looks like from this photo that no.
Yes, there is. Oh, not really.
Not maybe then.
It's underground.
Okay.
There is now, it goes right under 18. Adam, you fixed it like 10 years ago, all crushed in and black and everything. So that brook has always been there. It was part of the original 18th hole, when the original 18th hole green was over near where our practice green is now. But when that got changed in like somewhere between 1916 and 1923, and put where it is now, that brook stayed there, but it just became less and less.
Okay. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Just a quick question about the 11th green. How long do you think it would take to restore it? And what would the downtime be for the membership?
So I think if we determine, and again, this is Adam working with the agronomic consultant, if we determine that we can lift the sod and put it off to the side, and then put it back down, if that's viable, if the grass is good enough, then you probably look to do that sometime maybe the first week of October, give or take, maybe late September. And you take it off, it would take about a week to do the earthwork, find the green, put everything back in place, and then probably another 3 or 4 days to put the soil in the green to make sure it's compatible with everything else. So probably a 2 week, if you had perfect weather, 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks of construction. The grass would still be viable if you kept it over on plastic and kept it watered. Grass goes back down. You'd probably be looking at playing that maybe Father's Day, July 1st, something like that of the next year. So you'd lose a month at the tail end of one season and probably the first 2 months of your season the next year. And you just build a temporary green up on the hill, so you wouldn't lose the hole, but you'd play a temp. And this is a project that requires planning and thought, so it would be one of those things, if you decide to do it, let's say the fall of 2024, he can start preparing a tent green the season before, so by the time you're actually playing it, it's probably halfway decent.
I was in Denmark.
Next Mark. Hey, Bill, as a self-admitted golf design geek, it's a pleasure just to have a chance to ask you a question. So thanks for being here. My question is around sustainability. I know that a lot of modern, well-regarded designs like yours and Fort Crenshaw and the likes really focus on sustainability and water consumption and kind of the Augusta effect. What's your take on all that here at Worcester, if any, just moving forward?
Yeah, I believe strongly in obviously that concept, but I think the way it really pertains to courses in the Northeast is it's a seasonal thing. I'm a big believer that, I live in Philadelphia, so our golf season is a few weeks longer than you guys up here, but I know that, you cherish the time that you get to play, and it's a 3-season event, but during those 3 seasons, the golf course should be different. It shouldn't play the same in the summer. It should be, it burns out, gets a little bit browner around the edges. Spring is going to be cold, and obviously it's almost mid-May. We're still in blooming. Probably play a little bit wetter, a little bit slower, and then the fall's prime time. And that's when the pressures of the heat and disease, everything kind of doesn't go away totally, but the pressures are a lot less. So you can push things a little bit further. And I think that seasonal quality in the golf courses ties in perfectly with sustainability, because you're not sort of pushing something to be what it isn't. You're not overwatering in order to get something green when it shouldn't be at that time of year. And I think as it relates to playability, firm and fast and brown is great in my mind. I think that dead's not good, but pushing things to a certain level and ultimately, if that helps. Again, we talk about angles and width, and you've got slope out here, and if the ball will actually move across the cross slope of the fairway, then that's that level of precision we talk about where you actually have to shape a shot to place it in the landscape. So I think that seasonal presentation of the golf course is important. I think it keeps the golf course always interesting to a membership. Certainly a design like this, which is really thoughtful, and then that all lends itself to that sustainable method of maintenance.
Art, I'm sure.
So I was pretty intricately involved in the whole Pritchard plan. I was on the committee, we did the Ts, I was the chair of the Greens when we did all the green expansions. And you really evolution of 18 years of Pritchard. And part of the evolution, my concern would be of an architect of your stature. Your resume is obviously tremendous. You're in demand. Ron had a different situation. Ron was busy, but not quite the level. We were able to tap into Ron over a decade. I just have trouble visualizing some of the things that were implemented over those 18 years were depending on who's in power at this place. So if you have a lower handicap, some of that get implemented. High handicap, your spouse plays involved, that get implemented. That's the evolution of the Pritchard plan. So you're saying, in theory, I want to give this to the membership. In reality, it could be a lesson of frustration for you, your group. I just have a hard time leaving in 2024. You're going to be on that green with a bulldozer, and then 5 years later, we decide to do, shortening the course. You're going to come back, and you can explain to me kind of, how you work and truly with us for the next 18 years.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question, because we are busy, and I get pulled in sometimes I don't even know how I keep my schedule. I'm looking at Kevin's like, yeah. There are going to be times when I can be here, and there are going to be times when I can't be here. Shit, I'm being honest. But the guys that work with us, they're as good as anybody in the business, and if I talk to them about this setup and we lay it out to come and build a tee, I have zero doubt that they're going to get it just the way that, and I'll be honest, I don't build tees anymore. I just don't have time to go off and do that. But when it comes down to bunkers or anything like a green, I'm there. That's just, that in my mind is just too important. And I'll come in and I'll shape it and I'll leave, but then our guys will take over. And that's part of that whole process of why we've structured ourselves the way we have. And it's no coincidence that, Bill Corbin and Crenshaw structured themselves the exact way. Tom Doak, who I work for, structures himself the same way. Is that there's a group of trusted people within our organization that we believe can get the details and the creativity right. We don't farm creativity out to contractors. We never have and we never will. And there may come to be a point in time where you talk about frustration, where you guys might get frustrated with me. And then I say, you can't do that green this time frame, but I can do it here. And I'm hopeful that you guys will say, okay, that's worth it to have people actually come and get on the bulldozer and do it. The other thing is I'm pretty fast. So I can build stuff pretty quickly when we get to doing it. So it's a valid concern. I can't promise you I'm going to be here every single time, and I'd be lying if I said I would. But I can guarantee you that the guys who will be here in my place will do a great job. And that's also part. Brad lives in Hartford. He's not far away. Kevin grew up in Massachusetts. Unfortunate Patriots. Yeah, we want to get off the Eagles.
I'm going to say no more questions. To what Gil just mentioned, and Mark's concern, I think, was that we stretched the thing out for 18 years, okay? And I think that if we think back to Pritchard, those of us that are old and bright enough to be here when it first came in, was that the bulk of Pritchard got done early on. Is that a fair statement? Bulk of it got done the first 5, 6, 7 years, and then chipped away at some of it after that. I would envision that to be the plan here. And I think that, obviously we need to look at the cost and our affordability of them. But I think if you were here for the maintenance project, David had a couple slides that showed some projections of our cash flow for up to 5 years. And we anticipate the cash to be there, okay, to do all these projects. So I won't be standing here, okay? You'll have a different board. You'll have Artie may still be here they'll be here for another 3 years. So there's some continuity there. That was part of the plan of having that grounds committee have the chair there for 5 years for the continuity. And I understand what Mark's saying. I'm going to be here. Are we going to turn this place into a par 3? Probably not. Hopefully not. Okay. But at the same token, I think what Gil has said is that the overriding goal is we make this more challenging for the single digit, competitive offers, and more enjoyable for guys like me, for more of our female golfers, and And I think that this plan encompasses that whole thing. And when Brad's talking about, a bigger green, gives you the opportunity to tuck the pin. Well, I'm not going to pin. I'm hoping to get somewhere around the green, okay? So it can make it easier for me, but yet tougher for you, Mark, because you're aiming at the pin. So I think that was a great point that Brad brought up.
Mark, I'd also like to answer your question another way. I think it's important that you all know how Gil came about this plan. He walked the golf course alone. He walked the golf course with Brad. He didn't walk the golf course with me. He didn't walk the golf course with Adam. He didn't walk the golf course with the general manager or anybody like that. And it was important that it be done that way because I firmly believe that it's my role to give you the golf course that all of you can enjoy. I'm a low handicapper. I'm not going to build a tee that I want to play. So if I have anything to say about it, it would be implemented in an economic and fair and so that's the way I feel about it. So I think that's important to know.
Bob, you have a question? Well, I don't know whether I'm reading this correctly or not, but we had some bunkers taken out on 14. And do I see those bunkers on 14 in this picture right here? They're still there.
Three can be clumped.
This group on the right?
Yeah, right there.
They're in the plan. They're still there.
Who's still there? They were taken out, we put them back in.
Anybody else? All right, well, that'll conclude our